we're going to grow with more economic development going down the pathway. So, but the challenge, though, again, is the health of our and the state of our nation, and that's where I was correlating earlier with the alcohol. We're drinking, and I was wondering, correlating why are we drinking so much, and it was because we're hurting. Why are we hurting? So the residential school and the fallouts. So again, what is it going to take for us? And it was the healing, and I'm going to continue the healing for the nation. That it's just going to have to happen over a longer period of time.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ken Coates. I'm a senior fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and the director of the Indigenous program at MLI. I've been working very hard over the years to provide platforms for the innovative and creative Indigenous leaders who are reshaping Canada. I deliberately say it that way. They're not reshaping Indigenous world because that's obvious. They are doing that in ways that are quite dramatic, and you're going to love the conversation today. But they're also in the process bringing a new country into being, and it's a better one. If you don't mind me saying, we're learning so much from the process. I'm joined today by Hasheukumiss, who is the Hereditary Chief of the Ahousaht First Nation. For those of you who don't know, the Ahousaht First Nation is on the west coast of Vancouver Island. Their reserves are located near the tourist center of Tofino. Many people will know where Tofino is, only because the Prime Minister visits there all the time, people surfing and other things. This is a very economically active area, a long history of fishing, commercial fishing, a very, very active forestry, and some very big confrontations over forestry that happened over the years, and an expanding tourism industry that's one of the most vibrant in the country. Hasheukumiss is a really unique individual, and he's going to tell us today about his role as Hereditary Chief, because Hasheukumiss, that's actually not something that most people understand. They think it's either ceremonial or marginal or not very important, and you obviously have a very different role in your own community than that. We'll talk about that. But he's also an extremely creative political and commercial leader who has brought remarkable innovations, not just through making sure that the traditional governance system stays alive, but also by understanding that positive and sometimes assertive, I was going to say aggressive, but let's just say assertive action by the part of First Nations can actually change the community in dramatic ways. So thank you very, very much for being with us today. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. Thank you very much for this conversation. So I wonder, Hasheukumiss, if you could just start by telling us about your role in the Ahousaht First Nation as a head hereditary chief and how that fits with the elected authorities in the area.
Sure, thank you, Ken. So my name is Hasheukumiss, Richard George. I come from a long lineage of hereditary. I will be the 18th generation to hold this title once my father transfers it over, and his name is McQuina Lewis George, and this will happen within the next year. So right now, I must start off with, I am one of three principals of Ahousaht territory. I am the Tyee, which is the top situated chief of the nation. And then underneath me, I have Clawkashwea, who is our beach keeper, John Keegla, Acadius, Tyson Atleo, who sits in for his father, Sean Atleo. Ahousaht is an amalgamation from outside of Ahousaht, which we recognize, and he's from Kelsmont. And there's Tootloose, which is Ronnie George, and he's from another amalgamation area it's called Quatsuiat. So those are the five hereditaries of our nation, and we work very closely with our chief and council. And over the years of what we were doing, MHSS, Moktasis Huthi Stewardship Society, was formed, and this business was formed under Ahousaht Business Corporation. We were incorporated by the Ahousaht Hotwiyat, which is the hereditary that I just mentioned, and alongside the elected chief and council and advisors. In 2012, we ensured that the Ahousaht Nation once again retained control over decisions regarding economic development within the Ahousaht Hotwiyat, which is territory. Values fostered for sustainable economic growth within the Ahousaht community and adhere to the principles of good business and governance. The role of MHSS is to exercise and invest in stewardship and sustainable management of the resources of the Ahousaht Hasheukumiss in such a manner so as to balance the Ahousaht cultural values, ecological integrity, and the social and economic well-being of the Ahousaht people. Another primary objective is the management of the Ahousaht own source revenue, which minimizes the effects of the Government of Canada's policy responsible for reducing the amount of paid by the government to the Indigenous nations for their programs and services. Macdonald-Laurier Hasheukumiss Stewardship Society is responsible for managing economic development comprising of all the resources within the Hasheukumiss for the benefit of the Ahousaht Musqueam, which is people. We commit to doing this in a manner that is open, transparent, equitable, and accountable to all Ahousaht, while also holding true to our guiding principles, respecting one another, teaching one another, caring for one another, and helping one another. It's a little bit about how governance on the hereditary side and the chief and council side.
So just to put this in context, if you were to ask most people in British Columbia or across the country about hereditary chiefs, the only example we really have in the public realm in recent years has been the situation with the Gitxsan and the Wet'suwet'en people who are involved in protests over pipelines. Your involvement is dramatically different than that. Your involvement is in practical, hands-on government activity. What you just described was a marvelous value system about protecting the culture and the values and the language, but it also is very practical. This is also about fishing, and it's also about managing resources and liaising with government. So how do you navigate the relationship between you and the hereditary chiefs and the elected band council? Are there very precise boundaries? Are you superior to them? What's the right balance?
So this is it's a great question, Ken, because right now we're at a point where we're really trying to decolonize ourselves and really teach our people the hereditary system. Far too long, because of the Indian Act and the way they've shelved the hereditary system, everybody recognizes a chief counselor as being the hereditary of the nation. In fact, they're much like the Canadian government. They're elected into the system. Every 4 years, they could be elected out. Whereas my role as a hereditary, I'm born into this role. As I mentioned earlier, 18 generations to hold this title, and it was gifted to us by the Creator to again steward our lands and waters, and as well as our nation. So, the big misconception here is because we've been shelved for so long, we have to insert ourselves, and this is why my father, back in 2012, formed this society, Macdonald-Laurier Hasheukumiss Stewardship Society, to really separate and identify the two governances and the roles and responsibilities of each. The big misconception again, and the reason why we formulated this corporation is because of the misuse of the funds that the chief and council were exercising under, for instance, the logging rights. $1.5 million, they went and logged our territory without our permission. That's not their roles and responsibilities. And that really set my father off to a point where he formulated this society to separate the two. So we're at a point right now where my generation and the generation underneath me are now being educated through the school systems, through one-on-one conversations to really identify the true roles and responsibilities of the hereditary. It's going to be a process because of the last 3 or 4 generations of acknowledging the chief counselor. So what I've been doing with our chief counselor, and we're in with reconciliation with the province right now. And one of the things that I identified with the province again is I brought one of our elders into this conversation. And he was very, very, very clear. Those people over there are much like your government. Every 4 years they can change. Who you're not going to see change are these people over here, our hereditary, our true governance, Hasheukumiss, Ahousaht, Ahousaht Nation. And so by stating that, I'm really excited because we've just recently had an election and a whole full governance changeover in my nation. So when we get back to the table with the province, I'm going to re-invite my elder again to really emphasize that I told you exactly what was going to happen. Just much like your governance, they could be changed out. You're going to see a full panel of chief and councillors that you've never seen with your engagement 2 years ago. And who haven't you seen changed? The hereditary side.
Hereditary.
This is, again, one of the recommendations I put forth to my council, again, is to change the name from chief councillor to mayor and council, because in fact, that's exactly what they are. So there's been a lot of movement there, and I believe in the next couple of years before this next changeover of governance, they will be called mayor and council, because then there's going to be no distinction. It will really identify and separate the two governances, because much like my governance will never ever be extinguished.
So just to pick up on that point, this is a really, really fascinating and fundamentally important. Is the government of British Columbia recognizing the role of the hereditaries? Are you the ones that they come to when they want to negotiate forestry rights, or the government of Canada talks about fishing rights? They talk to you. They talk to you and the band council, for want of a better description.
Yep. So 2 years ago, when we met with the province for reconciliation for Ahousaht, that's when I separated the two roles, and this is where we're going forward now. I put a declaration to my nation chief and councillor stating that I, and the hereditary, are sole gatekeepers to our waterways and our land, and you guys are just the stewards of the village, our infrastructure, our school system, and so forth. So we've really separated the two now going forward, and the government now knows, because of this declaration that we put out, that they will now engage MHSS and the hereditary solely when it comes to our waterways and our marine protected waterways and our forestry going forward.
I mean, that is a phenomenal change for you, and a really intense one. Let's just back up a little bit so that our people who are watching this will sort of have a better appreciation for the Ahousaht First Nation. Can you give us a bit of a description of the nature of the main village? You have other reserves in the area, the topography. I've been there many times, and there may be more spectacular places on the planet, but I've never seen them. It's a beautiful, beautiful location. So Beth, help us understand.
Yeah, so we're located on the west coast of Vancouver Island. So when you enter Vancouver, the main city, you have to take a ferry, an hour and a half to get to the island. And then from the island, from Nanaimo, you have to travel to Tofino, which is roughly about a 3-hour drive. And then from there, you have to take a half an hour boat ride to get to my village over on Macdonald-Laurier and the Ahousaht Nation. Our territory is vast. We've recently just signed a land use vision protecting our trees for the next 100 years. And that was in the works for the last 36 years. And I'm very proud to say that we're one of the last intact biospheres around the world, and it's going to be kept intact for the next 100 years. So much like the practices in the past, that was take until the last was gone. Even though we've protected our trees for the next 100 years, we're not against logging. We never were. It was the practices that were being used during the clear cut. So now moving forward under our land use vision, we're going to employ our Ahousaht loggers, getting them back in the workforce and doing block cuts going forward. But we're not even going to need to do block cuts for the next 10, 15 years in my mind, because of the logging practices of the past. The 4 big major players that came to log in our area, they were so greedy that these 200-foot trees, if there was 30 feet that was rotten at the end, they would just leave it there, because that's how much trees we had good trees we had. So moving forward for the next 15 years, we're going to be able to salvage the blowdowns and then the past logging practices that they left for us. So we've set ourselves up really, really well for the next generations to come in the forestry sector.
So I love the way how you do this. You jump past something that is absolutely transformational and make it sound like you say 36 years as though it's a second. 36 years to gain control of forestry. You just signed a new agreement that will give you control for 100 years. Describe for us really quickly the process. Who are you talking to? And what's in the agreement itself? I mean, are you in total control? If the government of British Columbia wants to set up a campground, do they have to get your permission? Do they just go ahead and do it? I mean, how much control do you actually have? How did you get there? Why did it take 36 years? And what power does it give you now?
So let's start right off the beginning with my grandfather, Earl McQueen and George, Mitt. And I use Mitt as we're referencing him in the past. as he's passed on now. He was a logger and practiced logging all his life. He was a fisherman, practiced fishing. Both of those industries collapsed in the late 80s. And at that time, he said, no longer are you going to be taking any more of my resources out of the backyard, because we received zero profit out of the billions of dollars that they've taken. So I was 18 years old walking up a mountain with him at that time, and I seen the power that he had. One person can make a difference and can make a change in the world. And I seen it straight from my eyes, and what he was able to do and achieve. Halt logging altogether and put a referendum on it until it was decided in the courts of law. So that whole process at the very beginning was a real movement, I think, on my grandfather's part to insert our hereditary rights under our title. We were never ever ceded. And this is where we've used our exercising currently under Section 35 to again advance ourselves on making Canada acknowledge what they put on the table and really walk our paths for once and on all, because we've never ever really had equal rights alongside of our marine protected areas and our land use vision. So what does this really mean? Yes, we have full control over our territory now when it comes to the protected area. As far as the forestry goes, no longer can any other company come in and mark claim and go through that process anymore. We won't allow it either, because we do have our Ahousaht forestry. So we're going to solely be the gatekeepers moving forward, so to speak, when it comes to harvesting our resources, because we've always been the ones to conserve and to manage properly. You're looking at if you look at the history alone when it comes to management and mismanagement, for that fact, and if we go to the salmon, for instance,
good, yeah.
In my backyard, there's a big story that needs to be told here on the decline of the salmon. And I came into this role 5 years ago for my father because he came under health duress. And when he came in, he let me know that he's not going to be able to help me. His mind just wasn't there. And he said to get my claws into everything. So I literally did. I didn't take that lightly. And one of the first things that came into my desk within my first month is the new signing protocol of CIRMAC Canada. And my father signed that protocol in 2010 and 2015. And 2020, he was supposed to sign off on it. It was already, all the other hereditary signed off. And I looked at it and I said, nope, I need to pick apart the 2010 protocol, the 2015 to be comfortable, to make sure that if I deem anything that needs to be revised, well, I will do it at this point. And there was significant things that I seen there that needed to be revised. One was the financial gain that we were receiving. Roughly $1 million a year for the last from 2010 to 2020. And with inflation and everything else going down the pipeline, I threw a number on the wall to increase that revenue coming in. I was successful in getting tens of millions of dollars out of that protocol, which was able to invest in economic development within our organization. I'll go on, I'll further that a little bit further.
Could you explain CIRMAC first before you go further?
Yeah.
So I really want to pick up that line.
So CIRMAC Canada is a fish farm company that has been in our waterways for the last 25 years. My grandfather, Earl McQuinn-Mitt, was one of the first ones to actually grant them permission without any kind of monetary value, because he's seen the writing all over the wall at that time with the wild salmon collapse. He knew that the food security of the world was going to be reliant on farmed salmon. He had that vision. So he granted them to come into our territory in the first place. Then my father picked up the reins from him and did those two protocols. We've they've been a great partner to us. A lot of people are looking at industry and as a business, and this has become more of just a business partnership. They become really like family. We went through COVID. Everybody around the world went through it. And we have a protocol. Within that protocol, there's a yearly income that we receive. And during our time of need, they donated $700,000 of food security to our nation during that time. And no other, even my neighboring town of Tofino, our local grocery store that we spend millions and millions of dollars at, did not even donate one food hamper to us. So when we're looking at true partnerships, and I feel that we're good partners for Tofino, our neighboring community. We support them year round, and here we are with our time of need, and we didn't get the support from our local surrounding communities.
Yeah.
We did get support from, though, is our one and only protocol we have that has financial gain outside of any federal or provincial funds. And so they really stepped up, and they continue to step up to this date.
So that's really interesting. We're going to come back to fish farming. The fish farming is under some threat now in some very, very interesting sort of ways. Let's come back to that later if you don't mind. Because you did say that as a community, you gained millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars through the CIRMAC partnership, and then you said you used it for economic development. Yeah. So are we talking about creating a store on the community, or what's the economic impact of this?
Right. So because we were a logging and fishing community, we never really had the opportunity to tap into the tourism, and because of the remoteness of where we are, we can't open up a whale watching outfit, galleries and everything, because it's a half an hour to 45-minute boat ride to get to us. So one of the things that, again, this was the vision of MHSS, was to create economic development and job security for the future. And so when we're looking at the financial gain, when I first came into this role, there was 6 people at MHSS. That's who our organization was. We were a nonprofit organization. We had the one and only protocol with CIRMAC Canada, but we were limited with what we could do because of the funds for economic development. And hence why I fought so hard to increase our funds to go after some of these ventures that we've never had the opportunity to go after. A lot of people have to realize, when you live on a reserve, and this is the big difference here, when you live on a reserve, you can't sell your property for $1 million to $5 million and become rich. Much like our counterparts that live across Canada and BC, I live off reserve. If I was to sell my house right now, I'm going to get $2 million for it. So, I got to mention that first and foremost with the hardships that we've had over our lifetime in our village, and really being suppressed from the residential school, from the 60 scoop, and still to this day with USWA, and how many children are in care. So when I got in, again, when I fought for the funds to be increased, one of the things I told CIRMAC Canada is that I would like to really invest into the tourism industry to really give my nation an opportunity for the first time to be involved, because we are the true face of this tourism. It's not the Mamachli, the settlers here that have a story to tell. So when I was thinking about the financial gain and really telling CIRMAC what my vision was to really go after a business here in Tofino to give us a foothold first and foremost. And so that was where I really convinced CIRMAC Canada, one, that the inflation and the funds were just not meeting our demands anymore. I was able to achieve a significant amount to be able to go after these ventures. And while I was doing this, I had no foresight that this was going to come to fruition, that we were going to get the money, that we were going to actually dive into tourism full-hearted. During that COVID time, I shut down the hot springs called Macquinna Park. Macquinna Park is a worldwide destination, one of the best places in our backyard for the tourism of Tofino. Literally millions and millions of people over the last 35 years have entered that park, and we've seen zero financial gain from that. So during COVID, I shut it down, and I used the hot springs for our wellness, and we brought our people up there to use the springs for healing in a safe space. During that time, I engaged BC Parks, and I had let them know that, one, my father wanted me to address the name of Macquinna Park, that no name should ever be named after Hereditary, and they never ever gave permission, and they never asked Ahousaht or my father or our Hereditary governance to name that park after us. So one of the first things I did during my engagements with Macquinna, or the BC Parks, was let them know that we're changing that name. You had no right to name it that way, and we were going to name it Nis Macquinna, which is in the the uppers right now being changed. Nismaquin means the land that we own and take care of. So
Beautiful.
that the first one that I did, and the second one I let them know is far too long. I've been in the tourism industry as a family business for 30 years, and so I send all my people up there for my business, and I never ever hear, the boat ride's great, the forest walk's great, but the Springs was awful because you get your big toe in there with 200 people at times down there. So one of the things I did during COVID was negotiate a vision, looking for my nation. I wanted my nation to have an opportunity in the morning and solely have control of it. So I achieved that. We negotiated Ahousaht Ventures. Businesses have full access and only access till 12 o'clock every day. And then we share the hot springs with the tourism of Tofino in the afternoon. And I could have fully fought for sole access to that. But again, us Indigenous have always shared. We've never ever taken everything solely for us. We've always opened our doors, and we will continue to do that going forward. And I've proven that with my negotiations and opening it up to the tourism of Tofino. And boy, were they upset, to say the least, because I'm taking food candy away from a baby, more or less, when in a sense.
Yeah.
So when we negotiated the parks, we didn't have Ahousaht Ventures. We didn't have that money from CERMAC. But I negotiated for my nation and for the prosperity of our business, our estate drivers, to take advantage of the system and really have a stake, because we're talking about millions and millions of dollars here. So that was the first thing that we've done. And during that time, this is when I was negotiating with CERMAC Canada. And I had noticed one of the biggest whale watching ventures that was right next to my office. A lot of people were going back down and forth, and I was like, oh, this is unusual. There's 10 other whale watching outfits looking at these boats. I better go down and have a little investigation here. And that's when I discovered they were up for sale. One of the largest whale watching outfits in Tofino. So I did my quick work with CERMAC Canada, and I expressed that I need these funds. We need to get this deal done. I got the deal done. I had the funds in hand, and I engaged Ocean Outfitters and put a pitch towards really considering Ahousaht, because we've never had a stake in this tourism industry. And they had a long thought about it, 3 or 4 months, and then they finally accepted our offer, and we've taken over 5 boats, an office space, and a marine mechanic shop. And so this vision just came to fruition, and now we're 2 years into it, and we've successfully have broken even in our second year. So it just goes to show you that the world was really looking for an Indigenous experience.
Yeah.
And boy, are they getting it. Our drivers from Ahousaht that are coming to drive for us are singing for our guests that are out there, and the knowledge that they have from our whole territory are being given to the tourism. So we've exceeded our expectations in 2 years with our business. That led me to the Tofino Wilderness Resort, one of the second resorts, remote wilderness resorts in our territory of the Ahousaht Nation. And that vision there was different than tourism. I really wanted to heal the nation, and I really put a pitch towards my other Hereditary, because this wasn't a little venture. This was $6.5 million, and tourism is a turnkey. But because of the state of our nation and the recycled intergenerational trauma we've had from the residential school, we haven't been able to give them the space to properly heal. Meaning that from the residential school, and a lot of people that'll listen to this, I have to be truthful and honest here, and it could be a little harsh to hear, but I've now interviewed over 70 survivors from the residential school, because we have a residential finding. 22 nations went to mock squid on our backyard here. So during that time, the story never changed, and it was really upsetting to me. These 6, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, their first night was brought down to the basement, and they were sexually abused, whether it would be upon them or performed to the person. Not only that, the violence that was bestowed upon them was just horrific. My father told me a story recently, and he was just recently been able to talk about his residential school, and this is over 60 years later. And his very first experience there was brought in, shaved head into a bathtub. He didn't know what was scraped all over him. He was put into a room, and during the evening, he wanted to go to the bathroom. Went up to go to the bathroom, and the priest caught him and said, "No, you don't ever go out of your bed, and not unless you got to wait until the morning to go to the bathroom." And what he did is he took off his belt and strapped my dad so badly that he wasn't able to sit for 3 months. And so that was his first introduction of residential school. So again, the trauma that we've received and the lack of funding to actually heal us really was resonating with me. So I really put a pitch to use that resort for healing. And I met Minister Hasheukumiss, Minister Sachs. I brought Minister Hasheukumiss to the resort to see the vision. We invested $6.5 million. We're under $2 million upgrade right now. And so $8.5 million we've invested. I don't have any more money to go into wellness. So I was looking for help. And so she came, she's seen the vision. She verbally said to us, "We're not going to let you fail money-wise. You've invested so much, and we understand that your nation needs the healing." She brought me to Ottawa. I presented in her conference, and last May of 2024 was when we asked for $13.5 million for a 5-year operational cost to start turning the corner. And May came along and we didn't get the funds. And that was a real gut blow, because now I have to pivot back to tourism. And the healing that we need is so evident, it's undeniable. When I talk about that recycled trauma that we've not been able to turn the corner of, it's still happening to this very day, unfortunately. The rapes that are happening on a weekly basis due to the alcohol. And this is where, when we come to the alcohol, this is the other thing that I've really took on a big spearhead on, and engaged Mike Farnworth over 2 years ago. Last April, he brought me to Victoria and met him in his office, and I explained to them the situation that we're in Ahousaht. So
Mike Farnworth is a cabinet minister, correct?
Yes, of the province of BC. Yeah.
Yep.
So he has the power to, with a stroke of a pen, make a simple law change that's very, very needed. And the law change that I'm requesting is, a liquor or a restaurant needs a permit, business license to purchase that kind of volume of alcohol. An event needs a permit to sell that kind of volume. Why is it that any person I can walk into that liquor store right now with $100,000 and buy whatever I want, and I could do this every single day if I wanted to? Well, my nation, when I got into this role 5 years ago, I was only in here for 5 months when the liquor store manager came knocking on my door and said, I've got some real concerns here, and I just need to let you know the high volume of alcohol that's going to your nation. And this is when he gave me the numbers, and this is where it just was like mind-blowing. He was reporting up to 500 to 1,000 bottles every week of 26ers of vodka being sold by the cases, going up to Ahousaht. So that's when I got my security going up in Ahousaht, and we started doing surveillance alongside the RCMP. And we've discovered that, yes, it is true. These bottles are being sold at 60, 80, 100, and when the reserve is getting drier, at $180 a bottle. So, we are in a state right now where, and when I correlate drinking, as why are we drinking, any nation or any person? Well, you're hurting. Why are you hurting? And this is where I reverted back and picked apart the residential, the 60s and the USMA right now. So by picking that apart, I really had an epiphany that wait a second here, we gotta really address our wellness and on a high level, because we haven't given the opportunity. I talked to our elders, and Canada put forth back in 79, 80, 81 to the 14 nations healing sessions, and it was great. They all had a sense of a secure place to gather, and their funding got cut off. And I was talking to the elders, and that was some of the best healing sessions they had. And they've been asking for them to get back and going for over 30 years. And this government still refuses to, again, heal us. So self-determination now is where I'm going forward when it comes to healing my nation. I'm no longer going to be waiting for the government on any levels to advance my nation with economic development and the health and the wellness. So this is why the CIRMAC protocol is so crucial going forward. Now is a good time to go back into the CIRMAC protocol on the importance of what that really truly means to us, and the real story that needs to be told on the decline of the wild salmon. And this is when getting into my position, I've lived my whole life in my backyard. I fished it. I've experienced the collapse in my own eyes.
So let's just talk about that segment really quickly.
Yeah.
People talk about the decline of the fishery, but give us a bit of a sense of scale. I mean, you're talking here not about 10% fewer salmon. You're talking about the virtual disappearance of the salmon, correct?
This is the full collapse of the salmon as we know it, much like the cod fishery on the East Coast. You know, they mismanaged that. I don't know how many times they collapsed it, they brought it back, and now it's thriving, and now they're going to collapse it again if they don't manage it properly. So now when we're looking at our salmon throughout BC, you know, when I'm looking at what they're saying about the sea lice and pathogens and how it's directly affected the salmon over the last 25 years. Well, before I got into my role, I was an anti-fish farmer as well, because I was listening to the rhetoric from the environmentalists, and I never ever put my due diligence as an Ahousaht member to really investigate and go go to the DFO, go to CERMAC and really get the files. When I got into my seat, this is when I started to really look at the farms, because I wasn't impressed with them to begin with. But then all of a sudden, once I started to get educated and then really started to see what I had to do to address my environmental concerns, not Canada's environmental concerns, my environmental concerns. Canada had a threshold of 3.5 outside the migrational route and 2.5 inside of it. So what I did with my protocol is I took one step further than that to address my environmental concerns at 1.5 on the outgoing migrational route and 2.5h outside of that.
What those numbers were related to, right, too? You say 1.5 and 2.5?
Yeah, for sea lice per fish. So, okay. Yeah, so now historically, again, under the DFO's management, they could go over their threshold many times and there was no repercussions. So what the true clause in my protocol is I looked at that and I said, wait a second, I'm going to hold these guys accountable at a high level to address my environmental concerns. Here's my clause. It's not just a slap on the wrist if they break my protocol 3 times. And DFO gave them 90 days to get that threshold down. Well, I've given them 20 days. So they've been under a lot of pressure. They've invested over $60 million in the last 4 years to, again, address my environmental concerns. And they've knocked it out of the park. It's 0.25 to 0.30 per sea lice in the last 2 years. So, you know, with where we're trending with this, I just call it for what it is. It's really a scapegoat on diverting the decline to the fish farms. And then so it really got me going because then I started thinking to myself, wait a second, there's a bigger story to be told here that's not being told here. And this is where I'd like to really lean on a lot of my Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishermen in my local area to really pick it apart. And I did my due diligence, and plus I've lived this experience as well. So now when we're looking at the decline of this wild salmon in BC in general, well, you got to look at the Alaska fishery to start off with. Well, before the Alaska fishery even, let's start off with a salmon without rivers. That story has to be told first. Yeah. So now when we look at the logging devastations that happen in practices, I have 21 rivers in my backyard. 9 of them will never come back because of the logging practice. I've rebuilt one river at a tune of $700,000 called Bedwell alongside DFO and redfish, and we've got that one ecosystem intact. The second one is at Atleo River, which we're nearing completion. And I've just authorized a 3rd river system, which is the Cyper. Well, after Cyper, we still have 7 more river systems to build. So when we're looking at an ecosystem that's collapsed.
You just really quickly, because when you talk about that, I want to make sure everybody understands, because I've been up in these areas and I've seen some of the river sort of areas. But essentially, the logging was done right to the edge of the river. You have sloping and sliding that sort of the dirt got into the river systems and flooded over the salmon breeding beds, spawning beds, and they sort of changed the whole ecosystem into a bit of a moonscape. Is that correct?
Well, big time. You know, and this is where when the logging practices, there was no regulations back in the day. You would go right through the rivers, you would go right up the long, you would cut everything down. So when we're talking about why my rivers are in the state they're in, I have log jams that are kilometers and kilometers and kilometers up those river systems. Those are the ones that will never come back because of the financial cost to remove a river system like that. We don't have the funds.
Yeah.
So now when we're looking at going forward, the silt that's in these rivers because of the log is over 3 inches deep with the oxygen in that river system. So again, this is why I stress, for 450 million years, 7 species around the world survived. Why is it in the last 150 years, these species, not only the salmon species, every resources that we have in our backyard has collapsed? And I call it mismanagement on a criminal level from DFO. And if one just steps back and really takes a good look at it, and of course, DFO in Canada is never going to release this because we're losing those farms as a scapegoat. So now getting back to the decline of the salmon in my backyard. Well, let's start with the river systems first and foremost to give the wild salmon a chance to thrive and survive. And we haven't even started that level. So until we address my river systems, I'm not even going to look at anything else until those are intact as a real bringing the wild salmon back. The wild salmon, by the way, that ship in my backyard has sailed 25 years ago. This is the reason why we created the salmon enhancement here under Doug Palfrey and the local Vino. And this is where a lot of people don't understand why our enhancement started in the first place before fish farms came here, because of the locals identifying that we had less than 1,000 species in all of our rivers to begin with. So, when we're looking at, again, the historical facts of what's going on in the backyard, you look at the Alaska fishery, they've historically taken 50% of our local stocks even before they get to our waters. Recently, finally, that the Canadian and the U.S. government have made a protocol within the next 7 years to put a stop to that. That just happened within the last 2 months. So now let's see 7 years from now if that's going to really benefit from our local stocks, because we've never had that 50% reach us. So now the other big concern that we have when we're looking at the decline of the wild salmon, not only in my backyard, is the protection of the sockeye of the Fraser River and the Chinook. While they put a boundary, a restriction for our local sports fishermen, commercial and Indigenous fishermen to fish within one nautical mile. But what they haven't done is any scientific data, because again, the last of the 50% that made it to our territory, while we are capturing the last of that 50%, which we don't even know the percentage of that yet. So now how about we take a step back and look at what percentage we're taking of that last 50%. And how about we put a moratorium on the 4 and 5 year olds from the sports industry? This is what we've been saying is Indigenous and local enhancement for the last 30 years. The 4 and 5s that these sports fishermen take, that's a privilege. That's not, that's not a right. And they've made it a right, and they have their own DFO minister, for crying out loud, that regulates their fishery, so they're untouchable. So now when we're looking at going forward and with what's happened with the last 50%, so now historically, when we step back even further, we had canneries all through BC. We had a cannery in my backyard up at Cannery Bay. This is where I found it very interesting when I called the first collapse of the salmon industry as we know it, that should have been identified and never was. Over 100 plus canneries shut down between 1948 and 1955 in the coast. So now if those canneries were managed properly and the resources were there, we should still have them active to this very day. But that was a true indication that it was actually tappable back then, and they never took note. So now it's interesting to me that these 50-year increments will start to happen. 50 years, we'll shoot 50 years past then. And this is where we see the main collapse of the industry as we know it is in the late 80s when the BC Packers shut down. That's when over 600 of our Indigenous boats were handed over to the government because we could no longer afford to keep them. And Jimmy Pattison loaned us all these monies, all the licenses went to him. So, the industry, when we're looking at that collapse in the 80s, again, another very big high note that was never ever acknowledged. The Cannery Bay that I just mentioned, we had for 50 years of my life, we had over 50, 60 seine boats go into 10,000 tons per scoop up there. That shut down in 1988. The farms came into my territory in 85, 84. So you can't tell me 4 years has collapsed one of my main river systems to near hundreds of fish. It just doesn't add up. So all these things that I've been identifying and formulating together to really give the Canadian public, I'm releasing a video to really give a vision through an Indigenous lens and a non-Indigenous lens, because I feel if Justin Trudeau and the Canadian government did their homework in the first place when it came to the decline of the wild salmon, and not just listen to the activists, they would have taken a step back. And right now,
so sorry to interrupt you, Simon. This is really that fantastic information and commentary. I'm sure everybody understands that right now, starting actually this summer, the government of Canada released a plan to essentially close down all the fish farms within 5 years. And so it's the side you're talking about. Basically the argument is they're making it at the federal level is, well, we're not really absolutely sure what's causing the decline of the salmon. So with the utmost precaution, we're going to close these down. Scientists that I've spoken to basically say the problem is much different. It's like you say, it's in Alaska, and it's actually in the food supply up in the North and North Pacific. And so there's lots of reasons for the decline of the salmon. And fish farms, apparently according to the scientists, is not one. The activists are blaming it for that. But give us a bit of an indication of, is this fish farm, 2 employees who catch 2 fish once a year, or is it how big an operation? If they close it down, what's going to happen to Ahousaht?
Well, this is the thing, and I'm glad you asked that question, because right now we are water people. You've heard me say that we've been pushed off the resources off of our natural backyard, our grocery store is the ocean. That's no longer an option. We don't have the funds now to participate in the commercial fishery as it is. So the next best place that our people feel comfortable is on the water, which is on the fish farms. They're raising salmon. They're where they're most comfortable. A lot of them get to go home every day. We roughly have 48 people working in the farms right now currently. And I guess this is a good note. In the village that we have 2,200 people to our nation. 1,200 have moved off because of work. There's 1,200 people in the nation itself, and we are at a high poverty rate. There's only 200 jobs in Ahousaht. There's an unemployment rate, and this is the government's, that welfare system is, we never should have accepted that, because that has become a job for our people, unfortunately, over the last 2 generations. And because of the lack of opportunity that we have and the remoteness of tourism, we've not been able to turn that corner. So, when I'm looking at the jobs, first and foremost I've created, I mentioned MHSS when we first started off 6. Well, now I'm up to 75 people. That's huge. And, these...
Your organization?
My organization now. Yeah, we're up to that number. So, and I'm going to continue going. We're going to grow with more economic development going down the pathway. So, but the challenge, though, again, is the health of our and the state of our nation, and that's where I was correlating earlier with the alcohol. We're drinking, and I was wondering, correlating why are we drinking so much, and it was because we're hurting. Why are we hurting? It was the residential school and the fallouts. So again, what is it going to take for us? And it was the healing, and the healing I can't express was really what it about. And I'm going to continue the healing for the nation. It's just going to have to happen over a longer period of time. And it's so important for this protocol with CERMAC Canada now to be extended. So the 6-year extension that they just recently announced that they did wasn't sufficient enough to give us certainty going forward to keep these farms in. I just recently met with the new scientific team, and this is the frustrating part. I met with Minister Jordan to start off this process, and it was really, she was a really good minister in my mind. She was very transparent. She fought back on Justin Trudeau because I believe she felt that it was really unrealistic with what he put on the table in the first place. Anyway, she was shuffled, and then I had the unpleasant jury, I'm going to call it as it is, to deal with Minister Murray. She was an activist, and she had no vision outside of one tunnel vision to shut down farms. I've invited her to my farms. She stated that sea lice is her biggest concern alongside pathogens. And I'm scratching my head going, wait a second here. If that's your biggest concerns, how come you're not acknowledging what we've achieved in the last 2 years, something that hasn't been done in the last 30?
Yeah.
She got shuffled again, and call it as it is. She got fired, and it wasn't because of the fish farm. She got fired because of the bigger picture of the commercial industry, in my mind. So, anyways, now I'm dealing with Diane and this new minister, LeBouffier, and she's another good minister in my mind. But again, they speak out of both sides of their mouths. They're here for us on one sense. I brought her to the resort. We had a good meeting, and my son had a really powerful address to her. I addressed her, my father. So she had 3 generations addressing her on fish farms. And she verbally stated to me, fish farms aren't going to be removed from your territory. We gifted her a mask in that instance to cement it in stone. And yet, has she verbally put it on black and white to announce this to the rest of Canada and BC? Nope. And again, this is the bad faith that we continue to go upon from Canada. And I see bad faith. When we're talking about bad faith, I deal with many different governance levels with my nation, and I'm on a 5-nation fishery. My father again dealt with this for 20 plus years, and I'm picking up the pieces, and we're now with reconciliation with an IRAFR agreement with Canada for the next 2 years to advance our nation. And here we are. I'm shaking my head, and they unfortunately, because this is how long we've been dealing with this. My dad's generation and those lawyers that walked those paths, they're all retired now. So now I'm dealing with a whole new generation with these files that have not are up to speed, and now they're challenging us what we've already won and dealt with their predecessors. So again, when we're looking at the frustration here on the bad faith Canada, we're actually challenging them again because what we put on the table is very reasonable. It's an increase of 5,000 salmon out of their allocation that we've been promised every year. And this is where we're really upset with Canada and their bad faith. On our court case win in 2001, we were supposed to be head of the sports industry and the commercial industry. And here we are, we found ourselves 25 years later, and we're still behind the sports sector and the commercial sector, and we're fighting for scraps. So it's really frustrating dealing with this governance, and now with me being new to the politics and everything. I truly believe, when I'm listening to my son's analogy of a gatekeeper and how one was not meant to walk through that door. My grandfather tried to walk through that door unsuccessfully. My dad's been trying to walk through that door. And now here I am trying to walk through that door, and I'm still getting the runaround. I'm on my 4th set of politicians that I'm dealing with now at the fish farms. The minister has passed it over to the scientific team, which rightfully should have been in the control of this in the first place. Because right now, when we're looking at going forward now, and this is where I'm really, really challenging the system with UNDRIP, Section 1 and 6 under that clause, and then Section 35. Everything is on our side. I've with their transition that they've given us, I've put my own transition because they've not met me at the table for this in the last 5 years. So it came to the point where they released their transition and slapped us in the face in June without consultation, and they expected us to accept that. And so I said, nope, you're coming to see me, Minister, because that was a slap in the face. That's when she committed that the fish farms were going to be removed from my territory. So now holding them accountable moving forward it should be an open shut case at this point. I've ticked off every single box that they put in and under their mandate under what a transition is, and I beat them to the punch. So it should be really a swift mark of the pen as far as we're concerned. Because if you're going to acknowledge and our title and rights, and we're unceded still, so everything is in our ball court as far as we're concerned.
So when I listen to you talking about this, and I love your passion and I love your success. You're talking about not getting through the gate, but actually you're building a new gate and you're forcing the government to come through yours. I mean, I think I sort of have a sense of where this is going in the future. The one thing that really worries me a lot is you've got a really small group of people in your government. And you have the mayor, and as you call them, the mayor and the council looking after things in the village. You're looking after things for the nation as on a much broader scale. The government of Canada and the government of British Columbia and the various commercial interests, they have a lot of people lined up against you, to put it bluntly. You have to deal with federal politicians, provincial politicians. You have to deal with commercial interests. You got to deal with environmentalists. Environmentalists are some of the most intrusive people around them. They're from the least respectful of Indigenous rights and Indigenous authority. which I find really phenomenal, given that they always fall back and sort of claim to be speaking on your behalf, which always just bothers me a little bit. But on a personal level, how do you and your other hereditaries stop from being overwhelmed? Because at the very beginning, I just want to put you back to your words you already spoken. You've got a community that is ravaged by the historical trauma, where it's dealing with serious alcohol problems on a daily basis. And that shows up, as you said, in violence and rape and fires and also the lack of attention to work and all that kind of stuff. Just on a personal level, how do you keep yourself going? How does a hereditary chief like yourself wake up every day and say, okay, I'm going to tackle 37 more files today? Because that's how many people coming at me on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that?
Well, this is what a lot of people, when I first started this conversation, this title was not presented to me by anybody, just anybody. It was presented by the Creator. He presented us to steward and control our resources. So it really comes from an inner calling. I have 18 generations running through me right now. They are built within me. So that DNA is built in me to again continue the fight. As I mentioned earlier, one person, my grandfather, this is how I'm going to continue doing this with my voice, as I've seen my grandfather lead the way with his voice, being one person. It doesn't take an army to make change. One person can make that change with a lot of foresight and a lot of fight and not giving up. You know, when I look at the government and what they're doing and shifting, they're shifting right now, and they're saying they're going to acknowledge under the Section 35. They're wanting to do title and rights and give us prosperity. But in the sense, that's not the case. I know this much because I'm dealing with it right now. If that's the case, my title and rights would be adjured with my fish farms. They would be adjured by my 5 Nation fishery. Our resources in our backyard would be fully and controlled by me, which I'm making those moves for my nation and the rest of the hereditary. We're aligned. You know, I'm 50-50, going to be 51. The other hereditary that I have we're all within that 2-3 years apart, or younger. While Tyson is 39, so we have a lot of fight in us, and we're all aligned. And that's our strength, is our hereditary system are all one going forward, where we don't have any indifferences, and if we do, we straighten them out. And it's within house. We don't air our businesses and our affairs.
Yep.
Everything is
so. One of the things, just one of these, I've mentioned this to you before, but one of the fascinating sort of developments was when you started talking about your grandfather. Discovered that your grandfather was actually a student of mine at the University of Victoria, where he sort of showed up one day. He's a very quiet man. He was. I'm sure he was boisterous when he wanted to be, but in class he was very quiet. And he came in and he sat down and he started talking about his understanding of history and his desire to sort of understand the history of his people. So the first time I heard some of the stories you're telling me was actually when he did oral histories of his community for his assignments in my course. And absolutely transformative personality. I mean, he was a fabulous man, fabulous human being who was interested in sharing his stories and keeping them alive. And he did so with the same kind of passion and commitment that you have. What's really fascinating in listening to you today is that I can feel the frustration, but it's not showing up as anger. I can feel the deep frustration. You know, you're talking about politicians and they change the bureaucrats and they change the laws and they promise this and they promise that. But what I see instead is somebody who's saying, well, we're going to do what a lot of First Nations are doing across the country. Autonomy is the only solution. That you got to break the relationship with the Department of, well, they call ISIS now, the Indigenous Services Canada. You have to Indigenous Crown relations. You have to break that relationship and get self-government and autonomy over your own territory. And so I'm going to let you finish up with this because we're unfortunately used up our time, but this is so brilliant. 20 years from now, you're getting to be a little bit older at that point, and you're taking the boat over from Tofino and going over to Ahousaht, which, by the way, is one of the most beautiful boat rides you can ever imagine. And you're going across, and you've been successful. What does it look like?
What does it look like for my nation? We're going to have.
What does it look like for your nation?
Yeah, we're going to be parallel to Tofino as far as tourism goes. For one, we're going to have our stake in it. We're going to have I envision accommodations being over there as equivalent as Tofino. I expect to see us really advance as far as having our own resources, grocery stores and everything else that makes a community function, bringing in more work that way to provide, not being reliant on outside resources going forward, and making sure that we're independent as a nation and providing for ourselves and making sure that we get out of this poverty. And the only way we can do it is self-determination. And I can't stress that enough. No longer, I've seen and I've lived it myself with the broken promises going down. I've seen it with my grandfather, my father, and myself. I'm not going to let my son go through what we've gone through. And so going forward, it's all about self-determination, and it's being really building ourselves up to be on the same pathway as all the rest of Canada, and having an opportunity to showcase what we have on that level. And we will have broken that ground because of the work that we're doing right now, breaking through with that tourism industry. So 20 years from now, the world will come see us, because again, the cultural that we're going to be able to give them and they're craving, we're going to be able to showcase that firsthand, and we're the only ones that can showcase it. So I'm really looking forward to prosperity and really getting out of the welfare system. I really see 20 years from now, none of us being on welfare in my name. That's where my goal and my vision is.
Well, Ahousaht, this has been a phenomenal conversation. And I just love your passion for your community, for your culture, for your language, for the traditions. I hope you understand that there's an awful lot of people who will be coming to visit Ahousaht, that people will share your vision and will actually benefit from it in so many different ways. One of the ironies here is that Indigenous prosperity actually helps the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. It isn't about taking away from anybody. If your Ahousaht is prosperous, Tofino is prosperous, and Vancouver Island is prosperous, and British Columbia and Canada. So you have my full endorsement to proceed in your proceeding. I think it's absolutely wonderful. I'm sure we're going to have many more conversations in the future, and I wish you all the best, and thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure, and I'm always willing to step up, and I can't wait for my son to join me and my father. There'll be many more engagements, I'm sure, and then you can really see the past, the present, and the future.
I love it. Thank you again. On behalf of Macdonald-Laurier Institute, thank you for being with us.
True. That's goodbye in my language.